Hello, Moon Scouts. Welcome back to my channel. I'm very excited to be starting a new series to share with you all, where I'm going to be interviewing people and having stories from people that want to share their weird, paranormal, strange experiences, anything sort of in that realm. And for our first episode, I'm excited to be talking with Michael G. Williams. He is a part of a 2-member podcast called Arcane Carolinas. They are legitimately one of my favorite podcasts, and they're everything they do and they talk about and that their whole show is about is exploring the strange, the weird, the unexplained in the Carolinas. So how about you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I am Michael G. Williams. I am one half of Arcane Carolinas, along with Charlie, the other co-host. And I grew up in the mountains of Western North Carolina, about 30 minutes from Asheville, North Carolina. Grew up hearing a lot of a lot of adults saying things like, well, the supernatural is real, and basically everything that you imagine about it is real, and it is hostile also, and so we should never speak of it again, because to do so would be to give it power, which is a really fun way to grow up scared of the woods that you live in. But I have always been fascinated by the strange and the paranormal since then, and have had a few experiences, not like, every day, but I've had a few. And now I'm an award-winning novelist and write horror, urban fantasy, and science fiction.
Oh yeah, and totally feel free to put that plug in of your books. I personally keep meaning to check them out, and I keep forgetting to, but I actually finally looked up your books, and I'm really interested in the series that's about the zombies. It's something Withrow in it. It seems to be your popular one.
Yeah, the Withrow Chronicles are they're a series about a vampire lord who lives in suburban Raleigh, North Carolina, and none of his neighbors realize that he's the vampire lord of North Carolina, until there is a very small zombie apocalypse in their neighborhood in the middle of his homeowners association meeting, when he has to decide, do I like these people enough to save them, basically. And that's a fun, weird 5-book paranormal urban fantasy vampire series. It's kind of horror, it's kind of urban fantasy, and it's lots of vampires and witches, and it's about Withrow being a very antisocial person, learning sort of the hard way that it is possible for him to make friends and live in the world again. It's very interesting. It was a lot of fun to write, and people seem to like it a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was really interested when I was reading it. I was like, oh, this actually sounds like it has some humor like kind of some humor in it. And I can see where it's sort of horror, but I can see what you mean about the urban fantasy, because when I was speaking with Michael and asking like, what exactly of the genres that you do, and I remember you saying it's sort of hard for you to place exactly what those genres are, but you kind of get you Moon Scouts kind of get the idea. It's sort of in that kind of vein. And I saw one of them is also like a sci-fi one.
Yeah, my novel of Fallen Autumn is a science fiction detective novel set in the far future, and that one also won an award, that won the Manly Wade Wellman Award last year. And that one is, I think it's funny because it's got that like hard-boiled detective voice, and so he's kind of sarcastic and a little bit caustic as a personality, but also, he's got a lot of empathy for people, a lot of compassion for people who are in a tough situation. So that one was a lot of fun to write, because it's about somebody who has been like hurt and knows what it means to be hurt, and so would very much like to help people avoid that, and at the same time, does what I think a lot of us do, which is put on a very crisp shell of sarcasm
Oh yeah.
and like grim humor, because that's a great way to protect himself from being hurt again.
I completely understand that. But yeah, that's really awesome. And I'm gonna have links in the description for this video. I'll have links to the Arcane Carolinas podcast. Like I said, I highly recommend checking it out. I love them. And as well as his work as well, for you Moon Scouts to check it out. So let's go ahead and get into this. So let's just go ahead and kick it off. There's one story. So Arcane Carolinas puts out little zines. Is that how you pronounce it? Okay.
Yep, zines.
and they have just little random little facts and stories and comics, all having to do with of course, the paranormal, strange, unexplained. And one of them, the most recent ones, he had included a really fascinating story about his I would say the paranormal experience that has kept in your memory the strongest. And I would love for you to share that with everybody.
Sure thing. It's always hard for me to remember which year it was. In the winter of, I believe, the 94.
That sounds more dramatic, just in the winter of 94.
Fair enough. I think it was the winter of 1995. I think it was the fall semester of 1995 and spring semester of 96. That winter that bridged them. I was an undergraduate at UNC Chapel Hill at the time. And I had two jobs. And one of those jobs was in the help desk for the campus. And we were tucked away in the basement of this very old library, the oldest library building on campus. And, down there was this big, huge office suite and this big open space where there were a lot of desks for people to work at and answer phone calls and help people with computers and things like that. And then there were some offices in the back where the full-time staff worked. And then behind that, there was this huge open space where they stored a bunch of old computer equipment and, old magnetic tapes and stuff like that. Old technology stuff. And it was kind of this time when everybody was like, we don't really know how long we should keep that stuff, so let's just keep it all. So it was a lot of fun because you kind of go poke around in that stuff. My other job was working for the student newspaper. And the student newspaper's offices, because of the time that it was, didn't have, internet access from their offices. But my job was to turn the next day's newspaper into a web page for people to go read online. Because at the time, there was no automation of any of this. It was all very
high-tech stuff for the time.
This was really, we were chiseling it in stone tablets, basically. and so I'd asked my bosses in the help desk, do you mind if what I do at the end of my evening shift at the help desk is go over to the student newspaper offices and get the files that I need on a disk and bring them back here, because here I've got an internet connection and I can use my card to get in and out of the building and all that. And they were like, yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. We're happy to support this being a thing that can happen. So most nights I would finish my shift at the help desk and walk over to the student newspaper and do that, get all those files, and then walk back across to the library and then sit in the basement of the library by myself while I, turned it all into a web page. And I had a friend who worked that evening shift with me. Her name is Kelly. And she would generally stick around sometimes and study or just hang out and chat or whatever. And our bosses were very permissive and would just let us use that space basically as our personal computer lab if we needed to. And this was a time when not a lot of people had laptops and computers of their own. So it was very great. And we had a friend who did not work there, but it was okay for us to have friends come in and study with us too, even. And so he would come in sometimes and just hang out and study with us and kind of help make sure that we stayed awake and everything like that. So these two friends, Kelly and Marcus, were there with me this night. And I remember it was just so bitterly cold that night. And I got up to go get the files from the newspaper, and they said, well, we're done with our work and we're done with studying, so we're going to go home. And one of them was going to give the other a ride back to the dorm and then head on home. So we all left together, and I went over to the student newspaper and got what I needed and came back. By the time I came back, it was probably midnight, 1 a.m, something like that. And I entered the basement of the library, which meant that you had to use a key card, and which was all very newfangled at the time. And you had to use physical keys for some of the doors too. And getting in meant going through these doors that had new automated mechanisms attached to them. So there were these extremely loud motors that would open these doors in sequence for you to go in. It was like this very weird science fiction, like airlock kind of system.
I can picture that perfectly when you're explaining, like, just the, like, just, I don't know, just, yeah, just that really intense, heavy doors and machinery working. So yeah, I totally can picture that.
And one of those doors in particular, I remember at the time we always commented it sounded like a motorcycle starting. Like that's how loud it was when it would fire up. People would jump when the door opened. So I would go through these big automated doors, and then I would get to the door to our office suite. Well, through whatever miracle of purchasing mistakes, they had purchased doors that were not the correct size for the door jamb, the opening in the wall. So the doors had this like gap between them of about 3 inches, and we had this big special made like deadbolt, and we'd have to use this physical key and like crank it and crank it and crank it and crank it and crank it to get this deadbolt opened or closed at the end of the night, and use that to finally get into the office suite. So I go through all these doors and I do all this jazz, and the doors open and they're all the loud sounds, and then I crank open the double doors and I go and set my stuff down in the office. And then I think, I'm just going to run and take a quick little bio break and get a drink of water and all that stuff before I sit down and do this work. So I run down the hall and I'm standing in the restroom and I hear people speaking out in the hallway. Now, I haven't heard the doors open or anything like that, but I think, well, maybe I just didn't hear that. It sounded to me as though there were people speaking, like not immediately outside the door to the restroom, but like a little ways down, kind of towards our office suite. And my first thought was, well, Marcus and Kelly came back because they forgot something or, whatever. And so I walked up to the door out into the hallway, and as soon as I opened the door at all, then the voices just stopped, just completely dead silence. And I thought, well, they must have gone into the office suite. So I walked out of the office suite. And, this is an old institutional building. It's tile floors and cement walls, and like everything echoes like crazy. And it sounds like I'm tap dancing to get to the office suite. But I walk up and I open the doors into the office suite and they're not there. And I thought, well, maybe they went into the back for some reason where we store all the old stuff. So I go back there, nothing. They're just not around. And I started to think, well, maybe I just missed them leaving the building, except that I would have heard all the sounds of the many, many doors that have to be opened. So I thought, well, I must have just... Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, in the sound from the doors, you would hear whether they were coming or leaving. Like, it's loud. It's
Absolutely.
Very loud.
Yeah, I mean, it was enormously loud. And you could hear it either way. Yeah. And like during the day, then those doors just stood open because the library was open. But as soon as 5 o'clock rolled around, then all those doors would swing shut and you'd hear all the motors start. And then after that, those of us who were working evening shift, if we came and went, then you'd hear this sound, every time somebody entered or left. So I thought, well, okay, maybe I just made up hearing them in the hallway. Maybe this was a figment of my imagination. Maybe it's 1 a.m. and I'm tired, So I sit down and I start doing my work. And as I'm sitting there, I hear out in the hallway someone begin to whistle a little song to themselves. And it was tuneless. It wasn't, a particular song. It was, somebody whistling a little song that they're just making up as they whistle to pass the time. And it sort of moved up and down the hallway as though the person were pacing out in the hallway, but I couldn't hear anybody walking around out there. I could just hear the whistling come and go. Well, there were a couple of other offices on that hallway, but there wasn't anybody in them. Those were all people that, like, the building emptied at 5 o'clock, other than for us. And so I got a little freaked out by that and thought, I'm just going to go see who's out there. And I walked up to the big double doors that have the gap between them, and I pushed to open one of them. And as soon as I did, the sound stopped. And I thought, okay, that's a little freaky, and I think I'm just going to go home. I think I'll just get up early and finish this tomorrow, because at the time, having anything online was so new that they didn't really notice or care if it went up in a timely fashion. So I was just like, I'm just going to do this tomorrow. I'm just going to go back home. But on my way out the door, I stopped and emailed my boss and said, this is going to sound unlikely, but have you ever considered the possibility that this office is haunted, or have you ever heard anything unusual at night? And then I sent that email before I could talk myself out of it, and then I left. Well, the next morning I had an email from my boss that said, I need you to come in early to talk to me about whatever made you send that email. And I thought, well, this is it. I'm just going to get fired. You know, we're all IT people. We're supposed to be like very serious. And he's just going to think that I'm, you know, that I am in some way being exceptionally irresponsible, and he's just going to can me for this one. So I went in early as he had asked, and he brought me into his office and he closed the door and we sat down, and he said, I have been waiting 1.5 years for someone to say something, but I believe that our office is haunted. I think this whole floor of this building is haunted, and I think it only happens at night or other times when there's only one person here.
Of course. That's how it always goes.
Of course. And I was like, okay, are you serious? Because I really thought I was in trouble. And he was like, no, you're not in trouble. He was like, in fact, I want you to get up at staff meeting today and tell people a little about what you experienced, or at least ask if anybody else has experienced anything strange. Well, I was not willing to tell the whole story, but I did get up and say, I heard some weird stuff here last night, and I'm just saying that if you've ever been here, especially by yourself, and you've heard weird stuff, then let me know, and I will listen to you and believe you. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, and at the same staff meeting, my boss stood up and said, the new rule is nobody works by themselves, period. And if that means that you need somebody to come in with you, you know, and they could just be a random friend, I don't care, but nobody works by themselves, period. And that's just the new rule, and everybody has to live up to it. And everybody was fine with that. Everybody was delighted that they could have friends come with them and hang out. And that was something we could already do, but now it was mandatory.
Right.
So over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, I had several people who worked with us come and say to me privately, I don't want anybody to know, but... And then they would tell me stories like, I was here by myself on a Saturday night when we were not open. You know, I mean, this is like old days of IT. The help desk was like open in the morning and the afternoon and the evening up until like 11 o'clock at night, Monday through Friday, and then we were done. And if you've got a computer problem, too bad. It's probably not serious. We'll fix it next week, you know, kind of thing. But our cards worked all the time. And so somebody came to me and said that she had been sitting at her desk, like studying on a Saturday, and heard footsteps walk across the office. Again, those big tile floors and cement walls of an institutional building of a certain age. She heard footsteps walk up to her desk and then stand there tapping one toe until she got
right next to her desk,
like feet away from her.
Oh my gosh.
Until she packed up all her stuff and left. Another said that she had been coming back into the office from like going down the hall to the restroom and heard someone walking around the office as though they had just stepped out of sight into the back where we keep all the old stuff. And she thought, somebody must be down here with me. I want to know who it is. So she went back there and then proceeded to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes, as she put it, chasing footsteps that always disappeared around the next corner into the next row of magnetic tapes or the next row of old computers or whatever, until finally they led her back out into the open and there was nothing there.
My gosh, that's giving me cold chills. It's giving me chills.
So I thought, you know, well, this is it. The problem is solved. Everybody else has heard stuff, and now I need to find out who it is. And I started asking around, and there were a lot of people who worked in the library who had opinions, and they told me things like, it's the guy that the library is named after, you know, and stuff like that. But they all had these old ghost stories of, you know, him having been seen outside, like staring at the library and stuff. And I was like, no, this isn't describing anything that I've experienced or anything that anybody else has experienced. And then 3 weeks to the day, Kelly was not able to work that night, and I wasn't able to find anybody to come sit with me while I worked, and so I was going to have to work by myself. And I thought, stupidly, well, it's been 3 weeks and nothing has happened. I'll be fine. So I'm sitting there working, and I don't know, 11:30, something like that rolls around, and I'm just about to go to the newspaper and get their files and bring them back when I look at the doors as I'm packing stuff up. And again, these are these doors that have this big gap down the middle, so we could see through into the hallway beyond. And I see someone walk past them as though they had just stepped through the last of the big airlock doors. But none of the big airlock doors have opened or closed. There has been none of that sound. None of the sound of the motors opening them and closing them again. None of the sound that they made when they sort of slammed shut and latched. None of that has occurred. It is as though someone has just stepped through that door and walked past the doors into my office suite. And I thought, wow, that's unusual. And then the person, thing, entity slid back in front of the gap in the doors as though they had just sort of like snuck up to them and sidled sideways in front of them. And I could see just clear as day the silhouette of a man wearing a hat, like a fedora, and a suit, standing there in front of the gap, staring at me through it. And I later said to Kelly that I understood what a disk felt like when we wrote files to it, when we saved a document, because I knew instantly that he needed me to understand that he needed to get in there to look for something, and he couldn't do that when we were in there, and he didn't like having to scare us to make us leave, but if that's what it took, then he was by gum gonna scare us.
So was that, I'm sorry, what?
Oh, what? Because like now I had to get out of there. Like he needed me to leave so that he could have the place to himself.
Was this something you figured out later, or is this like an intuitive thing that just came to you like as soon as that moment happened?
Yeah, this was an awareness that arrived in my brain as though he had said it out loud, but he didn't say a word.
Right. Well, that's really interesting.
And I thought, if this is somebody who works with me, who's just coming to mess around with me, just to mess with my head, then I am going to pound them into the nearest manhole. Like I am just going to beat the tar out of these people. And so just to find out, I just like dropped my book bag and ran across our office and just body slammed these doors out into the hallway. And that silhouette just like stood there and watched me as I ran towards it. And the second I hit the doors, it disappeared.
Oh my gosh.
And there was just nothing except for what I did not know at the time is a classic sign, except for a patch of just freezing cold air.
Yeah.
And so that's when I said aloud, fine, you can have it, because I'm going to quit. And then I went back to my desk and I got my book bag and I got all my stuff together and I emailed my boss from the same computer and said, we need to talk because I'm finding another job. And then I left and I quit my job. At that time, that was the highest paying job I'd ever had. And I immediately quit and found a different job. And it was funny because the next job I had on campus was for a group, an IT group that had previously been the occupants of that office suite. They weren't there, anymore by the time I was working for them. They'd moved because stuff gets shuffled around, on a campus. But when I mentioned to the boss of that I had left because of a scary experience in that office suite, my new boss said, oh, is it still haunted? Because it was haunted when we were there.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the deal.
Wow. I don't remember you talking about that, about the other group saying like, oh, by the way, is that still haunted? Like just bringing that up casually. That is wild.
For the version in AC Quarterly, like I trimmed some of the stuff out because it was like too confusing to try to explain everything. But yeah, there were multiple people. And in the end, a bunch of people ended up quitting that job because they would wind up there by themselves on a Saturday or a Sunday or in the evenings or whatever, and something freaky would happen. And I eventually think I figured out whose ghost it is. There's a collection of stuff that's like special archival material. And in the 40s, a specific local artisan hand carved these like really beautiful decorated displays, like display cases for this stuff. And at one point, that stuff was all in that office suite being stored. And if I remember correctly, it's because it was being stored there for safety during World War II. And now it's all in a different floor. It's all on display, like floors above this in the same library. And I think that it's that guy, and he's trying to find his shells because the last place he knew, they were in the basement.
That totally makes sense, and especially I'm just thinking if the visually, if the hat he was wearing is a fedora, that would match the time period.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like it's matching up the most based on the other things, like how you were saying the other guesses that people were saying just didn't make sense, and especially with him sort of communicating with you that way. And yeah, I totally agree based on what you said, and that's so cool that you've kind of, you don't know for sure, but you've kind of figured that out a bit.
Mm-hmm. I've also since then found out that there is a phenomenon called the Hat Man, which is kind of like a variety of shadow person. I didn't know that until like 3 years ago. And so for all I know, it was one of those. I have no idea. But like if I look for the most rational explanation, then it's that's that guy. But at the time, I had never done anything, not to be too specific, but I'd never done anything that would cause me to have like hallucinations or anything like that.
Right.
So like, I wasn't experiencing anything like that to my knowledge. And I haven't experienced anything exactly like that since. I've had other weird stuff happen. I've seen UFOs a couple of times, and I've had experiences where I feel like I received communications from the dead in dreams and things like that. Things that like checked out afterwards. But again, that's not something that happens every day, and it's just something that has happened. And I very much believe that things like that are possible, and that there is a lot that goes on in the world that we don't know or understand.
Absolutely. I think it's just another form of science we haven't figured out yet, and we're still learning about.
Exactly. And I'm not sure that we'll ever totally understand it, and that's okay. Sure. I don't think that means we should stop trying. And
sure.
I don't think that if we don't understand it, that makes it unreal,
That's a great way of putting it, and I'm just absolutely fascinated, and just anything unexplained, especially in the paranormal field. And I haven't had too many experiences myself, and that's why I'm especially interested in hearing other people, because it just seems like so many people I know or I've ever met, it's like the majority of people have had something happen to them that's been unexplained. And we're gonna have to go ahead and kind of wrap it up here.
Sorry.
Oh, you're okay. Just seeing what time it is here. Unless you want to, I don't know, you said.
I could go for a few more minutes if you wanted to, but if you want to wrap it up, then that's also fine.
Okay. I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up, just since.
Sure.
I've already started talking about that. But as you all can hear, there's certainly a definite potential for more, episodes or interviews in the future where we can discuss other experiences that you've had or that Charlie has had. And I've had a few. I've never had a visual experiences. Mine have to do more with like the feelings. I've had them connect with me in a feeling kind of way. But that will be shared in another episode. But thank you so much for sharing your story. This one in particular, I just when I was reading the story the first time, I was nervous while I was reading it. And then when you actually got to telling about what you first, the leading up to the little things that you heard and kind of were seeing, and other people talking about, and there's this like lead up, of things I'm already like, oh my goodness, but then actually seeing, well, when you said silhouette, I mean, was it more like, I remember I asked you this, but I can't remember your answer. Was it more like a shadow or was it a full body apparition? Like you could see the whole man?
I couldn't see details. Like I couldn't make out his face. But from my perspective, he looked like a solid object that was backlit.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and I've also heard of the whole Hat Man phenomena. Like you said, sort of like I don't know much about shadow people, but I've read a little bit about that. I haven't had a personal experience, but it could be something along those lines. And I'm always interested in the details about people's experience. I love like asking questions and being like, okay, what did you exactly hear at what time, and what did you see exactly? So that's really interesting. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I hope you Moon Scouts all enjoyed listening, and let me know if you'd like to hear them again in some future episodes. Like I was saying, it would be great to also get Charlie, who is the other member of Arcane Carolinas, and I will have links to all of that in the description below as well. So any last words you'd like to say, Michael? We already kind of plugged you in there at the beginning, so
I'll tell you what I told somebody at a convention this past weekend, which was if you feel that something has happened to you, then it probably has.
That's an excellent way of putting it. Yes. And yeah, feel free to reach out to my channel if you've had any experiences. And I think, are you guys like hearing from other people, or?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. You can reach us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com.
Great. And I'll have that written in the description below. So thank you again so much. And I will see you all Moon Scouts next time. Bye.